Hey guys, today we're talking about how God found his reflection. Dim your lights, get comfortable, and enjoy. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this helps you fall asleep. Also, let us know in the comments where you're from and what time you're listening. Let's start. Before mirrors, before oceans learned stillness, before even light had a name, God moved through his creation without ever truly seeing himself. He had filled eternity with sound and motion, yet had never paused to ask what the source of that motion looked like. He felt his presence in the sweep of galaxies, the rhythm of tides, the patience of trees. But these were feelings, echoes, not faces. Somewhere within the vast hum of existence, a quiet curiosity rose. If I made everything in my image, where does my image live? It wasn't pride that asked, it was loneliness disguised as wonder. He wandered across his own creation, walking not as ruler, but as listener. He passed through nebulae glowing with the first heat of being, through the silence that sleeps between stars, through the breath of comets that sang hymns in languages of ice. He listened, and the universe responded with admiration, but not recognition. The suns knew his warmth, but not his eyes. The planets obeyed his laws, but never met his gaze. He wanted something that could look back. He turned to time and asked it, "Do you know me?" And time, startled, answered with seconds instead of words. He turned to light and said, "Show me what you see." And light scattered, too eager to obey. Even darkness, loyal and soft, tried to help by wrapping him in quiet, but quiet cannot describe. So he kept searching. He came to worlds still cooling, to mountains not yet finished rising, to rivers rehearsing what direction meant. He leaned over them, curious, waiting for a moment when motion might hold still long enough to form an image. Sometimes he glimpsed something, a shape of brightness reflected in a storm, the shimmer of thought across the skin of a lake. But it vanished as soon as he noticed. Creation, it seemed, loved him too much to trap him in a picture. Ages passed the way clouds pass over water, slowly enough to be noticed, quickly enough to be forgotten. Then one evening, when the universe had learned the art of dusk, he found himself above a small valley. A hush lived there, different from the silence of space. This hush was alive, attentive, full of tiny waiting things. In its center lay a pond, round and shy, hidden by reeds that whispered secrets to the wind. The air smelled of beginnings. God felt something he hadn't felt before, a pulse of anticipation, like a door preparing to open. He stepped closer, careful not to wake the world too soon. The pond did not stir. The surface was smooth, a patient silver. He knelt, and for the first time, creation forgot to move. The wind held its breath. Even sound itself folded its wings. Slowly, he leaned over the water. At first, he saw nothing, only depth pretending to be emptiness. Then a faint outline appeared, the curve of a face forming from the cooperation of light and water. Eyes opened within it, soft and endless. They looked at him. Not up, not down. At. He blinked. The image blinked too. A heartbeat passed, and the universe learned what recognition felt like. He studied the reflection. It wasn't what he expected. He had imagined something vast, uncontainable. Instead, what looked back was gentle, nearly human. Features shaped not by command, but by care. The eyes were kind, the mouth thoughtful, the expression uncertain in the most beautiful way. It was not perfection he saw, but possibility. "So this is me," he whispered, and the whisper traveled across the surface like wind written in slow handwriting. The water shivered, splitting his image into ripples that circled outward, each ring carrying his astonishment. When the surface settled again, he smiled. The reflection hesitated, then smiled back, slightly delayed, as if courage needed a breath before imitation. "You're learning," he said, amused. "So are you," the ripples seemed to say, though they used no sound. He remained there for a long while. Clouds passed overhead, painting different emotions across his mirrored face. Grief, serenity, curiosity. Each change taught him something. He realized he could feel through this image, that every tilt of light or breath of wind changed not only what he saw, but what he understood. It was as if the universe had created a classroom made of reflection, and he was its only student. When night arrived, he didn't leave. The moon rose and poured its calm silver into the pond until the water looked like liquid forgiveness. God leaned closer again, and the reflection became faint, luminous, honest. "You look softer in the dark," he said. The image shimmered, bashful, like a child praised for the first time. He reached out and touched the surface. The mirror broke into gentle chaos, and his face scattered into 1,000 trembling lights. He did not mourn their loss. He wanted to feel what he looked like. The cool water met his fingertips and slid between them like recognition choosing its form. Each drop that clung to his skin became a tiny mirror, each reflecting a fragment of his gaze. He raised his hand and saw galaxies swimming in the drops. Stars caught themselves in miniature heavens, glowing softly as if shy about being held. He lifted his palm toward the real stars above, and for a moment the universe aligned, sky reflecting hand, hand reflecting sky, so that between them existed no distance at all. A warmth filled him then, not the fierce heat of suns, but the mild heat of affection, the kind that makes space gentle. He understood something. The reflection had never been missing. He had only been looking in places too grand to reveal it. The truth of himself lived in stillness, not spectacle. He whispered to the pond, "Thank you for holding me." The water answered by rippling once, small but deliberate, as if bowing. He stood, feeling the pull of gravity as something tender rather than obedient. As he walked away, he noticed that every surface capable of reflection, river, dew, even the glaze of a stone, seemed to wake slightly, eager to remember his face. It was as though the world had been waiting for him to notice it, noticing him. He paused at the edge of the valley and looked back. The pond, silver under moonlight, waited patiently, carrying the after-image of his visit. "Will I see you again?" it asked without words. "Always," he said, "wherever something dares to be still." He turned toward the horizon, where dawn prepared its first whisper of color. The stars above blinked in slow applause. He smiled again, this time without question, and continued walking, each step creating a new mirror beneath his feet, each breath painting his reflection across the sleeping air. Dawn returned like an old friend who knew the way in. The light was softer than before, as if it remembered the lesson of the pond, that stillness makes truth visible. God walked through the cool hush of morning carrying no thunder, no command, only a quiet awareness of his own reflection hidden everywhere. The world greeted him in gestures too small for eternity, a leaf turning, a drop of dew learning how to fall, a sparrow shaking the night from its wings. Each one bowed in its own language, and he bowed back, not as creator, but as participant. He understood now that the mirror he sought was not one thing. It was every surface that dared to receive light without trying to own it. He came to a narrow path through fields breathing fog. Mist clung to his shoulders like memory, and with each step, the earth released a faint sound, roots stretching, stones remembering pressure. He liked the sound. It was the music of existence getting comfortable again. He thought about the reflections he had found, in water, in human faces, in the silence between heartbeats. But he felt there was still something missing, some last mirror that could show not only what he looked like, but what he felt like. He wondered if perhaps feeling itself was the reflection. At the edge of the field, he met a child, small and bright-eyed, sitting beside a puddle. The child was drawing circles in the mud with a stick, watching the ripples bend the sky. God knelt beside him, unseen but not unfelt, and said, "What are you doing?" The child whispered, "I'm trying to see the sun smile." God smiled. "Does it?" he asked. "Sometimes," said the child, "when I don't move." The words went through him like a blessing disguised as simplicity. The child had just told him the secret he had spent eternity seeking. Reflection happens only when stillness and patience agree. He whispered a thank you that brushed the child's cheek as a breeze, and the child laughed, not knowing why, just knowing the air had turned kind. He continued walking until he reached the forest again. The trees stood tall, old enough to remember when light was still learning direction. Their trunks were etched with years, and their bark shimmered with thin films of morning moisture, turning each tree into a pillar of dull bronze. He laid his hand against one trunk, and immediately he felt his pulse returned. Not perfectly, but delayed, translated into wood and sap. "Even time reflects," he murmured, "just slower." He listened to the heartbeat of the forest, roots carrying the sound of rivers beneath soil, leaves translating wind into syllables. It spoke to him without adoration, without fear, just conversation between equals. He reached a clearing where a lake waited like a huge, sleeping thought. The water was dark, mirror smooth, so wide that clouds lay across it as if resting their weary reflections. God sat at the edge, cross-legged, and stared into it until his eyes forgot the difference between seeing and being seen. The face that emerged was not the same one from the small pond. This one changed with every breath, older, younger, smiling, sorrowful, each version true for the moment it appeared. He realized that identity itself was a reflection of motion. To exist was to shift gently between meanings. He touched the water again, and small waves radiated outward, catching fragments of sky. "You move because I move," he said, and the lake answered with ripples that looked like laughter. He saw birds swoop across the mirrored surface, their wings splitting his image into 1,000 temporary heavens. He didn't mind. Every break was an opportunity for reunion. As the day lengthened, he watched humans gather by the shore. They washed, fished, laughed, argued, forgave. He noticed how the water showed them their faces and how they sometimes turned away when they didn't like what they saw. He wanted to tell them not to be afraid. "Your reflection isn't a judgment," he whispered. "It's an invitation." One woman knelt to wash her hands and saw her face tremble in the ripples. For a moment she smiled, not at herself, but at the realization that even trembling light could be beautiful. God felt that smile echo inside him, like warmth finding its echo. He rose and followed the shoreline, letting his feet brush reeds that swayed like voices whispering agreement. He thought about how every creature, every grain of dust, carried some tiny reflection of his nature, and yet none alone could contain it. Only together did they form a picture close to truth. "Maybe that's why I made so much," he mused. "I needed enough pieces to see myself fully." He came to a bend where the lake narrowed into a stream, its current brisk, confident. The water there reflected nothing for long. It was always moving, always translating sky into motion. God bent down, watching light fracture and reform over the stones. He could barely see his own outline, but that didn't disappoint him anymore. He had begun to understand that clarity wasn't the goal. Connection was. To see himself clearly would mean stopping the flow, freezing life. He preferred blur to stillness if it meant the world could keep breathing. He continued along the stream until it disappeared into a meadow thick with wildflowers. Bees moved lazily among them, their hum a steady drone that vibrated in his bones. He knelt beside a patch of blossoms, each one catching sunlight differently, yellow petals turning gold, white petals glowing blue in shadow. Even color reflects mood, he thought. I made light, but look how cleverly it answers me back. He leaned closer to one flower, small and plain, its petals trembling in the breeze. Within its center, a drop of nectar shone like a captured sunrise. He saw himself there too, not as a face, but as warmth, sweetness, patience. Maybe reflection isn't what I see, he said quietly, but what I give. The thought deepened. He realized that every act of kindness, every moment of mercy, was another kind of mirror, polished by love. In the gentle turning of a parent's hand, in the forgiveness whispered between two hearts, his image lived and breathed. He felt it ripple through creation like music through air. I am everywhere someone chooses tenderness, he said, and the meadow answered with wind. The sun slid lower, painting everything with the gold of completion. Shadows lengthened, blending into the calm rhythm of evening. God sat in that light, surrounded by countless small mirrors, each blade of grass holding a glint of sun, each glint holding a portion of his smile. He no longer needed to ask where his reflection lived. He was living inside it. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening. Somewhere, a distant bell rang, not made of metal, but of time announcing another day well used. He opened his eyes again, watching the last ray dip below the hills. The world folded its brightness with care, storing it for tomorrow. He felt the same urge to fold this day, to keep it close, not for possession, but for gratitude. Every reflection, he thought, is a reminder that I'm still learning how to see. The first star appeared, trembling in the vast dark, like a heartbeat caught in infinite breath. God smiled towards it and said, "You too are my mirror." The star flickered brighter, proud to agree. He stood, the meadow sighing around him, and began to walk again into the growing night. Each step left a faint shimmer behind, not light exactly, but recognition. And everywhere he went, the world grew slightly more aware of its own beauty, as if understanding at last that to be seen is to be loved. Night widened like a calm breath, and God let it pass through him as he walked, feeling the hush take shape around his ankles, the grass brushing his skin with the shy bravery of small things that still believe in morning. He moved without destination because the path itself had begun to behave like companionship, and the world, newly taught by rivers and dew, kept lifting low mirrors to meet his gaze. A beetle's lacquered back, turning his face into a moving moon, a spider's web storing a round coin of starlight and paying it out in silver whenever wind asked gently, the lacquer on a fallen leaf polishing dusk into something drinkable. He realized the art was not to seek reflections, but to welcome them, and so he softened his attention until the night felt safe enough to be accurate, until darkness came closer, not as secrecy, but as depth, He spoke to it the way one speaks to a friend who declines the lamp. You are not a refusal of light. You are its kindness, its rest, its long, unbroken sentence. And the dark, pleased, adjusted its hem so that distance could be walked without bruising. He crossed a low field where fog rehearsed forgiveness and made every fence temporary. And he loved how boundaries learned humility when touched by softness. Loved how the fog lent the world a single texture in which everything could be kin. In that shared fabric, he felt the old loneliness loosen, not because it fled, but because it found a job, to keep space open for what arrives next. He kept walking, and the horizon learned his rhythm, lifting an inch with each step like a curtain coordinated with breath. Somewhere, a brook mended its own lullaby after a twig interrupted it, and he smiled at the competence of water that knows how to continue without making a speech. He thought of humans sleeping nearby, of the body's quiet committees that meet at night to repair, to file, to forgive, and he blessed the unphotographed labor of cells and silence. Then, in a hollow where the ground remembered rain, he found a pool so still it felt academic. And kneeling there, he saw not the face the pond had given him yesterday, but a new curriculum of self. His features braided with sky, his eyes containing 2 patient stars, his mouth practicing a mercy it would soon speak. And he understood that reflection is not a portrait, but a living treaty between light and willingness. He dipped a finger and wrote a circle on the surface, a soft law without police, and the ring travelled outward until reeds signed it with their thin green signatures. Rising, he let the pool keep the lesson and continued, greeted by wind that had been there the whole time pretending to be absence. Keep me moving, he told it, but let movement be pedagogy, not punishment. And the wind, a good teacher, pressed against him just enough to reveal new muscles of balance. The world brightened by degrees that only patience can measure, and morning arrived with professional courtesy, placing gold exactly where blue had left room, and on the slope of a hill he paused to watch light debut itself on stones, then on stems, then on small lives wearing today for the first time. He noticed how each thing returned light differently, and he named this practice returning rather than reflecting, because reflecting can be vain, but returning is gratitude. He sat with that word until it warmed his hands from the inside, and then he walked again into a grove where leaves filtered the sun into slow rain and the air smelled of green engines, and there he learned another mirror: touch. He laid his palm on bark, and the tree, full of edited seasons, returned him not an image, but a delayed memory of pressure, a reply in wood time, and he knew that touch is how bodies hold the truth that eyes cannot store alone. Birds wrote informal treaties with branches above him, and the grove held its jurisdiction with kindness. Beyond, the terrain opened to a river that carried sky like a rumour, and he stepped beside it with the manners one uses when entering a chapel already praying. Fish revised the manuscript of light beneath, and reeds annotated the margins with wind. He walked for hours, measured not by clocks, but by changes of fragrance, wet stone to warm grass to pollen to shade. Every so often, he knelt and drank, and each cold mouthful tasted faintly of yesterday's thunder made accountable. And as he drank, he understood another law without teeth: to receive without hoarding, to be filled and stay pourable. He rose, and a heron took off, as if demonstrating the geometry of leaving without insult. He thanked it, and the air archived the gratitude under a heading called Small Accurate Gestures That Repair the Weak. Toward noon, heat learned confidence, and the day's palette turned from pearled restraint to full-throated color. He stepped into a meadow, and the meadow, being fair, stepped into him, and together they established a jurisdiction in which no blade of grass could be anonymous. Bees kept the Museum of Sweetness open without admission, and butterflies filed appeals on behalf of astonishment. He lay back and used the sky as a listening device, taking dictation from distance. Be large enough to host arrivals, be empty enough to hear. From the hedge, a fox watched with doctoral curiosity and found nothing to correct. He closed his eyes and felt the reflection that cannot be seen, the inward one, made of pulse and consent, where love tests its own softness against the edges of breath. That mirror did not show a face but a tempo. He lay there until tempo ripened into trust, and then he stood, brushed the meadow from his shoulders in the courteous way one leaves a friend, and went on toward hills that kept their blue, the way good secrets keep their tone. As he climbed, stone tutored his soles in friction, and the slope informed his lungs about appropriate wonder. At a ledge he paused to watch the world practice being multiple and one. 5 breezes occurring at once, 10 shadows negotiating with the same rock, 1,000 glints from the river, all saying yes in their own dialects. He said yes back, and the ledge held. On the far side, he descended into a long valley where time had done carpentry with light, making rafters of afternoon and flooring of shade. And here he met silence working a second job, not absence, but glue. It held bird call to leaf, held water to the idea of direction, held him to himself. In that valley he tried an experiment, walking without thinking about walking, seeing without naming, loving without intending. And the world, relieved of being constantly described, became brighter by a shade of honesty. He laughed, not loudly, but with the dignity of someone realizing that effort is not the only way to arrive. And the laugh broke into sparrows, and the sparrows found a rhythm that taught the laugh to keep going without him. At the valley's seam, where 2 grasses argued kindly about height, he discovered a spring no map had promised, and the spring offered a cup made of itself. He drank and saw in the brief lens of that rising water an accelerated biography of the day. The blue that taught him yes, the bark that rehearsed reply, the heron that carried away a portion of departure, the fox that practiced discerning without devouring, all of it presented in the liquid grammar of return. He whispered thank you, and the spring, young but wise, said you're welcome by making more. Afternoon grew articulate and shadows acquired opinions. He crossed a stand of pines that smelled like remembered courage and entered a field newly mown where hay lay like golden sentences awaiting punctuation. He walked between them and added commas with his breath. At the field's end, a stone wall kept history from wandering off, and he touched it in greeting, feeling the arithmetic of hands that built it. 1, 1, 1, together. And he blessed arithmetic when it chooses to be neighborly. Above, cloudcraft drew deliberate shadings across the day, and he realized painting had been invented by sky long before brushes. He thought of humans again, how they lift each other in pieces and call it community, how they break and then decide to mend, how their eyes can be mercy's front door when trained in gentleness. And he felt the great inward mirror brighten, not with pride, but with belonging. He saw in an inward flash of sweet accuracy that his reflection stays polished when he keeps giving himself away into small vessels. A pause, a name said right, a chair pulled out, a cup within reach. Evening arrived barefoot so as not to wake nerves, and he welcomed it with the old salute. Palms open, spine listening, The first star tried on its roll and found it still fit. He kept walking to the river's bend where rocks had arranged a council, and the council had agreed to slow the water for a spell. In that calm, he stepped out onto a flat stone and stood above a page of moving silver. There his face appeared again, composed but not still, and he spoke to it as one speaks to a friend you meet often enough not to waste on ceremony. Keep me truthful, keep me pourable, keep me small in the right ways and large in the right places. The face agreed by brightening at the edges. Night gathered its vast hem and laid it across fields and crickets, those faithful librarians of quiet, opened the catalogue and began to file the day under useful headings. Kindness performed without witness, sunlight that did not hurry, forgiveness that spoke first. He listened to their dry music like a pen travelling a page and let it write him calmer. Somewhere in the near distance, an animal chose trust over speed, and the air, notarizing the choice, grew fractionally sweeter. He resumed, not to arrive, but to continue, and continuity itself kissed his temples like cool water. The path curved into a stand of birches that had learned to keep the moon, and he touched one smooth white trunk and felt it return his hand as a cooler brightness, learning yet another synonym for reflection. Albedo, the art of giving back more gently than received. Through the birches, he found a glade where darkness had pooled into comprehension, and there, at last light, a pond waited with the patience of an elder. He approached, knelt, and the surface, already rehearsed for honesty, offered him an image that included the stars and the shadow of a hawk and a low cloud, and the humid breath of soil, and the face looking back was the sum of all of it. He saw the tenderness he had given away, returning with interest, saw fatigue confessed without shame, saw humour taking its shoes off, saw the precise weight of a name spoken kindly, and he said aloud, not to water, not to sky, but to the treaty between them, "This is enough." The pond, satisfied, placed a single moth-lapped ripple into the scene to sign it. He rose, and as he did, he felt the entire night behave like a mirror tilted toward morning. He understood with the ease of something finally remembered that his reflection is safest when distributed, that no single mirror should be asked to bear the burden of the whole, that rivers and faces and leaves and cups and silences must share the work. And so, he blessed the distribution and walked on, leaving behind not footprints, but permissions. You may be gentle, you may be slow, you may return what you receive in a softer key. The permission settled on grass and will wake as dew. At last, where the valley narrows into a corridor of listening, he stopped, placed his hand over the pulse that belongs to everyone, and spoke the night's last accurate sentence. "I am here when you notice, I am here when you forget, and every time you return something kind, you are polishing the only mirror that matters." Then a breeze, credentialed by nothing but tenderness, moved through, and the corridor of listening carried the sentence forward. And forward it will go until morning puts it on like a shawl and teaches it to hum for those who have not yet learned the melody, and God, satisfied not by grandeur but by circulation, turned toward the place where dawn keeps its first cup of light and continued, certain now that reflection is not what stares back, but what stays in motion after love has touched it. He continued through the new light of dawn, where mist curled like memory and air still held the cool flavour of forgiveness. The river ran beside him again, quieter now, as if aware that conversation had already happened and what remained was companionship. He walked barefoot along the bank. The earth accepted each step without protest, keeping only a soft echo as proof. All through creation, there was a sense of breathing together. Wind, leaves, his chest, one long, slow rhythm that refused to hurry. He remembered the vow he had whispered to the valley the night before, to keep distributing his reflection until the smallest places could recognize themselves as holy. That vow had no signature, but the morning seemed to remember it. Dew rose to meet sunlight. Birds practiced sincerity, and a spider, patient in its geometry, made a web so precise it seemed designed to catch only wonder. God paused to look at that web. Each thread carried dew like tiny orbs of dawn, and in every orb he saw himself again, multiplied, imperfect, real. The web trembled under a light breeze, and for a heartbeat his reflection wobbled, distorted. He smiled. Even distortion is a kind of truth, he said softly. Perfection is just honesty that forgot to breathe. The spider waited, still, accepting the universe's weight in silk. He blessed it for knowing stability without stillness. Beyond the trees, the land opened into wide plains where wind rolled like invisible surf. He stepped into it, and the air rushed past him, filling the sky with sound. He raised his arms, feeling the weight of his own presence diffused through movement. "So this is what it feels like to be everywhere," he said. The world answered with rustling grass. He stood for a long time, eyes closed, letting thousands of small stems brush against his legs. Each touch was a conversation. Each whisper said, "We see you, but we do not bow, we simply belong with you." He understood. Creation had learned the lesson he had been teaching himself. To reflect does not mean to imitate, it means to share. He wandered on until he found a lone stone carved by years of water and weather, a sculpture of persistence. He sat upon it and listened to the long argument between horizon and sky. "You are the same," he told them. "Only perspective divides you." The horizon blushed with color in agreement. As he sat there, he felt the warmth of sun rise through the stone into his hands, steady and grounding. He realized he had not felt lonely in some time. Perhaps it was impossible now. His reflection lived in everything that touched light. Midday arrived slow and patient. He walked beside the stream again, now brighter, almost playful. Fish darted between shadows, light fractured into ribbons that wove through water, like thoughts passing through patience. He leaned over to watch them, and once again his image swayed across the ripples. "Do you ever tire of me?" he asked the stream. "Never," it murmured. "Every version of you teaches me a new shape." He laughed, a quiet sound that joined the current like music dissolving into a chord. He followed the stream to where it split around a small island of stone and moss. There, he rested, lying on his back, watching clouds organize themselves into kingdoms and then dissolve without rebellion. "Ah," he said to the sky, "you know how to let go." The sky said nothing, but the clouds, busy with transformation, answered by drifting on. He closed his eyes and listened to the hum of insects, the rustle of reeds, the far pulse of thunder somewhere over mountains. Everything around him was in conversation. He was no longer the speaker, just the quiet center of listening. When he opened his eyes again, the world had turned gold. Late afternoon leaned over the landscape like a friend with a secret. He saw his reflection in everything at once. The shimmer of heat rising from stone, the gleam of water, the bright skin of fruit hanging from a nearby tree. He plucked one, not for hunger, but for affection, and took a slow bite. The flavor was sunlight translated into sweetness. "So even taste remembers me," he said. He walked again, carrying the fruit scent on his hands. The air shifted cooler as evening approached, and he came to a village, small, quiet, full of the smoke of cooking fires. People moved through their routines, laughter, fatigue, small disagreements that smelled of care. None of them saw him, yet he felt recognized. A child looked up suddenly, smiling at nothing in particular. God smiled back. He saw, he said softly, not with eyes, but with the part of the soul that remembers light. He lingered there, invisible but felt, like warmth that stays on skin after sunsets. When night returned, he left the village and climbed a ridge where he could see both stars above and the distant lights of hearths below. The symmetry pleased him, heaven and earth reflecting each other, each pretending not to need the other, but shining best together. He sat on the ridge and exhaled, the sound blending with wind and crickets. Maybe this is what I was looking for, he said, a reflection that doesn't end at the surface. Stars thickened overhead, spreading across the sky like spilled thought. He looked up and saw himself everywhere again, stretched into constellations, scattered but still whole. I used to think I needed stillness to see myself, he whispered, but even chaos reflects if you love it enough. He watched meteors fall, streaks of fire that burned out before their echo faded. So short, so bright, he said. Even endings can mirror beginnings. He lay back on the grass, feeling the earth's steady breath beneath him. The night was vast but not empty. It was filled with versions of him learning, remembering, and returning. The moon rose, full and patient, and he saw himself once more in its pale light. There you are, he said, the oldest mirror of all. The moon glowed silently, reflecting sunlight across the sleeping world, a reminder that even borrowed light can guide. As he closed his eyes, he whispered to everything around him, the stars, the rivers, the dust, the dreams of sleeping people. Keep me in motion. Don't let reflection turn to worship. Let it stay conversation. The breeze answered by moving through trees like breath shared between lovers. God smiled, the kind of smile that makes dawn inevitable. Good, he said softly. That's exactly what I meant. He fell silent then, but silence itself spoke back. We will keep moving. And in that movement, his reflection lived on, endless, ordinary, perfect in its imperfection, alive in every corner where love was patient enough to look. The morning began before light was fully certain of itself, and God felt the world breathing without waiting for him. Rivers moved, winds rearranged the perfume of fields, clouds rehearsed their entrances, and he watched it all with the quiet surprise of someone overhearing their own song played by another instrument. He had made this rhythm once, long ago, but now it continued without command, every element reflecting not his image, but its own understanding of him. And he realized that reflection had matured into self-sufficiency. He stood at the edge of the same meadow that had often mirrored his calm and saw dew forming on grass blades before his shadow even reached them, each drop holding a small, deliberate universe. And he whispered, "You no longer need me to stay bright." And the dew answered with a shimmer, humble but independent. He smiled, feeling pride that did not seek ownership. He began walking slowly, sensing how creation had learned its own language of gratitude. Bees navigating by memory instead of miracle, trees deciding their growth with confidence, rivers editing their curves without waiting for his hand. It was no rebellion, only maturity. He listened to the sound of autonomy and found it beautiful. As he walked, he noticed his reflection appearing in unexpected places, in the gleam of a beetle's back, in the pause between two bird calls, in the small kindness of a mother tying a child's hair. He recognized himself, but each reflection had rearranged his expression, softer, more specific, like translations of love made fluent by context. He thought, perhaps I am no longer a face but a principle, and the thought warmed him, like bread fresh from some infinite oven. He crossed into a forest where light scattered through branches in sheets of gold and green. Here, the air smelled of independence. He touched a trunk and felt the sap rising not because of his will, but because of its own hunger. So this is what freedom feels like, he murmured. The trees did not answer, but their silence was approval. Deeper inside the forest, he came upon a clearing where water pooled in the hollow of a fallen stone. It had collected there from rain alone, forming a mirror no larger than a human heart. He knelt and looked into it. This time, no divine symmetry waited for him. Instead, he saw 1,000 other eyes layered through one another. The eyes of animals, of humans, of rivers, of storms, all overlapping to form a reflection that moved and breathed and refused to stay still. He realized he was looking at a world that now reflected itself. He whispered, "You've learned my trick," and the water rippled as if laughing. "No," he corrected himself, "you've learned our truth," because ownership felt childish now. He sat beside the pool and listened to the insects measure time with wings. He felt the forest's pulse move through soil and root into his bones, until the boundary between observer and observed dissolved. He understood that his reflection no longer required his presence, that the echo of his first breath had become an independent rhythm. The universe was now self-aware. He wondered if that meant he could rest, or if rest itself had already been delegated to wind and lullaby. He stood, walked again, and with each step sensed the world responding in its own agency, waves adjusting shorelines, stones conversing through pressure, stars exchanging brightness, all of it happening whether or not he watched. He whispered to the air, "You remember me even when you forget," and the air replied with a long exhalation that sounded suspiciously like contentment. He smiled and kept moving. Soon he reached a mountain path carved by centuries of weather rather than miracle. He climbed until the horizon opened like a wound healed beautifully. From the summit, he saw continents glittering under day, clouds pacing like shepherds of light, and he realized the earth had become an enormous mirror that faced no single direction. It did not point back to him but outward, reflecting to the rest of itself. He sat down, cross-legged, and watched the panorama breathe. He felt no jealousy, only awe. He remembered when creation had been fragile, in need of constant tending, and now it walked on its own. He thought of parents watching children cross streets unaccompanied for the first time, the mixture of pride and ache. He laughed quietly and the sound scattered like petals. "So, you have grown up," he said. "Good. That was always the plan." He leaned back against the mountain and closed his eyes. Visions came unbidden. The first light, the first storm, the first prayer whispered by something unsure of what praying meant. All of them continued now without prompting. He realized that creation's faith in itself was his reflection. He did not need to stare into water anymore because the world itself had become his mirror, alive, articulate, capable of compassion. He opened his eyes again and saw the shadow of a hawk passing over the valley. Its movement was precise, graceful, perfectly necessary. He followed it with his gaze until it vanished, then looked down and found his own outline painted on the ground by sun. It too moved when he moved, but the shadow obeyed the earth, not him. He stepped aside and watched it slide across rocks, trees, and moss until it merged with the shade of clouds. Even shadows had found freedom. He He felt a pulse of joy so wide it became sorrow for a second, sorrow for the part of creation that would no longer need him. But then he laughed again, realizing that love which demands dependence is not love but fear. He whispered to the valley, "Go on then, I trust you." And the valley answered by blooming louder. He stayed on that mountain for what could have been hours or centuries, letting time perform its quiet cartography around him. Eventually, he rose and began to descend, feeling lighter, less central, more everywhere. Along the path, stones glittered with mica, tiny mirrors catching the last threads of sunlight. He touched one, and in its fractured reflection saw only a fragment of his face. It was enough. Perfection, he decided, was simply having enough fragments to make a whole if ever needed. He walked until twilight stitched the edges of day and night together, the seam glowing violet. He thought, perhaps this is what I am now, a seam, not a source. And as darkness returned, he felt no fear of disappearing. He knew that somewhere water would hold his image for a second, that somewhere laughter would echo his tone, that somewhere forgiveness would choose to exist and thus conjure him anew. He whispered into the dimming sky, "I am replicated by love." And the stars, newly born from sunset, answered in their flicker language, "And we by you." But the meaning no longer mattered, because meaning itself had learned to live without audience. He kept walking through the gentle dark until he reached another meadow where fireflies rehearsed the choreography of belonging. They blinked, forming patterns that spelled no words, yet conveyed every reassurance. He watched them and felt gratitude that glowed softer than light, a gratitude made of release. He said, "You have my permission to continue without permission." And the fireflies, disciplined in chaos, blinked once more as if to say, "We already were." He stood there for a while, listening to the arithmetic of their glow until dawn began again at the horizon's lip. He realized that the cycle of day and night had become the ultimate mirror, each reflecting the other endlessly, neither claiming to be the original. He smiled, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Good. Keep going." And in that sentence, the universe recognized its autonomy and began another day without asking why. He descended into a valley that had learned to glow without looking up. And as he walked, he realized the world no longer waited for his gaze to begin. Grasses moved with their own grammar, rivers revised their own sentences, birds took dictation directly from wind, and in every motion, he felt a loosened thread of himself traveling outward, weaving patterns he would never need to approve. He smiled at the relief of not being necessary and at the deeper joy of still being loved. And he whispered to the hills, "Continue." And they did, without ceremony. At the bend of a stream, he paused, not to check his reflection, but to witness how water remembered sky on its own, holding clouds with a steadiness he once had to teach. And in that steadiness, he saw the day compose itself. Light as premise, shadow as nuance, color as afterthought, and everything correct because it was honest. Further on, he found a circle of stones warmed by old suns and sat among them like a student who had finally discovered that the lesson is not inside the book but around it. The stones returned his weight without flattery, and in their mineral patience he sensed an ancient permission. Be smaller if you wish, be larger only when love requires. He accepted both and rose again, walking until fields widened into a plain where wind practiced freedom in long, intelligent strokes, combing the world into belonging. There he spoke to no one and everyone at once. "I am not leaving, I am distributing." And the plain translated the sentence into fragrance that traveled farther than words. Approaching dusk, he entered a forest whose canopy carried the day like a gentle verdict. And underneath, the understory glowed with the faint, unambitious light of things content to be halfway to heaven. He touched a fern, and it curled slightly, not out of fear but etiquette, and he said, "Forgive me," and it uncurled with equal manners. At a fallen trunk turned to nurselog he knelt, and watched life advance by tiny courtesies. Moss giving room to seedlings, fungi giving a grammar to decay, ants writing quick footnotes no eye could read unless it loved the alphabet of small. And he understood that the world had adopted his earliest intention and improved it. Create, yes, but also circulate, reflect, yes, but also relay. He moved on until he reached a clearing where a shallow pool mirrored the first lit star, and instead of leaning over, he stepped back and let the star and pool talk without witness, learning the discipline of absence that is not neglect. The conversation sounded like a soft ringing in the bones of the earth, and he said, "Good," and continued. Night came barefoot, and with it fireflies arranged the curriculum of wonder in blinking clauses that never needed to memorize themselves. And between those moving lights he recognized a truth he had not said aloud. His reflection had become time's hobby, appearing and dissolving in moments that didn't require permanence to be complete. He crossed a meadow stitched with that delicate brightness, and felt the night carry him as easily as a cup carries water. And he thought, perhaps my face is now a verb. At the meadow's far edge, a low ridge offered a view of two lakes like twin thoughts, separated by a narrow causeway of earth. He walked the strip and felt history underfoot, centuries of hooves, bare heels, careful wheels, each passage another polish on the mirror of place. Halfway across he stopped and said, "If I do nothing, will everything fall apart?" And the lakes laughed softly in opposite directions, a stereo of assurance. He answered himself, "Then let me be the silence that things lean on," and he stood there long enough to become that leaning. Wind learned his outline and revised itself around him with the courtesy of air well brought up. When he moved again, the night adjusted without fuss. Beyond the lakes, a glen waited where owls wrote footnotes to the dark, and a brook annotated stones with the bright ink of motion. In that annotated quiet, he felt the first ache of a different longing, no longer to be seen, not even to be echoed, but to be used humbly by the world that had grown wise. So he said to the brook, "Take what you need," and to the wind, "Take what you need," and to the soil, "Take what you need," and each answered by becoming slightly more itself. He liked the theology of that and kept walking until the ground rose into a shoulder of rock exposed to moon. There he found a shard of mica held in the moss like a sentence half remembered. He lifted it and saw 1,000 tiny mirrors giving him back 1,000 imperfect gods, each accurate in a different corner. He pressed the shard into the bank again, this time angled to send moonlight deeper into shadow, and thought, "Let usefulness be my portrait." Farther on, he met a fox whose eyes held fire that did not burn, and for a moment they stood exchanging species of attention. His wide and planetary, the fox's narrow and precise. And he understood that both were correct, because both were kind. He bowed, the fox bowed in its way, and two kingdoms were satisfied. Near dawn, he reached a low hill where grasses held the night's last cold, and the sky rehearsed day in faint rehearsal lines of pink and grey. He sat and listened to the first bird choose the first note, and in that brave, simple choice, he heard his oldest reflection made modern, a sound that created room. The hill breathed, the note multiplied without command, and morning arrived by consent. He said, "This is enough evidence," and stood into the new light, which did not crown him, but befriended him. As the sun cleared the horizon, he spoke a small vow to the open day. I will keep reflecting only what helps you know yourselves. I will keep withdrawing where my brightness would blind. I will keep arriving as warmth rather than spectacle. The day tucked the vow behind its ear and went to work. He walked along its edge like a scribe, making sure margin remained for unexpected mercy. Fields lifted their small green faces to the labor of photosynthesis, and he blessed the honest arithmetic of leaves. A heron rehearsed patience in the shallow edge of a pond, and he blessed the science of waiting that feeds without hurry. A cluster of stones warmed for lizards not yet awake, and he blessed the quiet logistics of comfort. Noon balanced itself on a precise pin of blue, and he practiced invisibility until even his footsteps learned to be suggestions. Clouds assembled a parliament and passed a motion for shade over the tired parts, and he approved without voting. In the long ease of afternoon, he realized the difference between origin and center. He had been the first more than the second, and now the world had found its own center, plural and local, which was better, safer, truer. He took off the last vestige of indispensability and left it on a branch for history to examine later. By evening, the air had cooled into forgiveness, and the horizon lifted its bowl for stars. He returned to the twin lakes and saw torchflies renegotiate the shoreline into a dotted line of permission, and he said, "I release you from needing to justify your light," and every small lamp shone with a relief brighter than brightness. Night deepened, and with it a tenderness so wide, he felt himself blur into the background hum that keeps crickets employed. In that hum, he placed a single thread of will. Let what is kind become inevitable. The thread vanished into the weave, and the weave tightened in quiet satisfaction. He closed his eyes, knowing that somewhere a mirror would catch a face, and somewhere a hand would pour water, and somewhere a name would be pronounced like a doorway. And in each of those places, his reflection would appear not as authority, but as alignment. When he opened them again, dawn had already begun a careful inventory of colors, and he smiled because the world had not waited for him to signal yes. It had learned to say yes first. He rose, brushed the clean dust of ordinary holiness from his knees, and walked on, not at the front, not at the back, exactly alongside the day that mirrored him best, not by showing his features, but by practicing his favorite verb, continue. The world moved gently beneath him, no longer needing his footsteps to begin its rhythm. Dawn spread like a confession told to no one, and God walked within it, quieter than a thought. Every leaf, wave, and sound behaved as though aware of him but unafraid to proceed. He no longer felt like a presence entering creation. He felt like the pause between its breaths. As he walked through the fields where the horizon still carried the perfume of night, he realized that his reflection had ceased to be a mirror. It had become circulation. Light traveled from sun to leaf, leaf to air, air to water, water to cloud, and back again. Every exchange carried a trace of him, but no single moment tried to hold it. He loved that. He had spent eternity being recognized. Now he wanted to be continued. He passed a group of children near a riverbank, their laughter carrying across the water like a melody that refused to resolve. One child picked up a stone and tossed it into the current, and the splash caught a circle of sun so perfect that for an instant he saw himself there, only to lose the image a heartbeat later. He smiled. "That's enough," he said softly. "Perfection should disappear that quickly." He sat on the grass watching them, unseen but deeply visible, feeling their joy strike chords within him. that no prayer ever could. When the children left, he stayed, tracing the air where their laughter had been, realizing it had mirrored his voice more faithfully than any hymn. He rose again and followed the path along the water until he reached a place where reeds stood still as waiting. The river curved into a pool that reflected both sky and earth so evenly that direction itself seemed undecided. He knelt, expecting to see his face once more, but the water gave him something else. Movement layered over movement, ripples from fish beneath, breezes above, and the slow choreography of time bending light through shifting angles. His reflection was everywhere and nowhere. He understood. "So this is what I've become," he said. "Not the image, but the act of reflection itself." He touched the water and watched it tremble with delight, and for the first time since creation began, he didn't try to still it. He let the surface move, let the reflection break, let himself scatter into pieces that didn't need reunion. He continued through fields where insects performed the slow theatre of living, wings glinting, pollen drifting, a quiet pulse of continuity. He listened to their rhythm and heard no difference between their purpose and his own. A bee hovered near his shoulder, carrying gold stolen from sunlight, and he whispered, "Keep it. You wear it better than I ever did." He kept walking until the path turned upward into hills that had forgotten their age. The climb was long, steady and sweet, filled with the scent of dry stone and thyme. Each step measured how far he had come, not in distance, but in detachment. At the summit, he stopped and looked down at everything. Rivers winding like soft calligraphy, clouds grazing mountains, villages breathing in slow confidence, and he saw no need to name any of it. Language had once been his favorite invention, but silence had surpassed it. He sat on a boulder and watched shadows stretch across valleys, slow and elegant, painting evening into the folds of the earth. The sun began its descent, deliberate and generous, brushing gold across everything it touched. "You've learnt my craft well," he said to the sun. "Better than I ever taught." The sun said nothing. It only kept setting, perfectly on time. He laughed quietly. "Of course," he said. "That's the point." As the sky deepened into indigo, he noticed something new. His reflection appearing not in the world, but in memory itself. He could feel echoes of himself inside the minds of living things, their kindnesses, their forgiveness, their courage to keep going. These were not prayers, they were continuations. Every act of goodness, every whisper of empathy was a reflection forming where water couldn't reach. He realized he had seeded mirrors in souls. "So you are my water," he said softly, "and I am your light." The night arrived like velvet folded by steady hands. Stars bloomed above him, endless as before, yet somehow closer. He saw his reflection there too, but not as a single figure. It was the shimmer between stars, the quiet agreements that keep gravity faithful, the dance that binds chaos to meaning. He lay back, watching the night learn to hum, and understood that he had succeeded in something greater than creation. He had created continuation. He whispered to the stars, "I will not look for myself again. I will listen." The stars answered by staying. He closed his eyes and let the universe pass through him, endless and kind. And for the first time, he felt not eternal, but present. ChatGPT Zai. He remained upon the hill as night completed its slow arrival, and all things settled into their rightful volume. Not silence exactly, but a calm correctness of sound. The river below threaded silver through the dark like a sentence that had found its true length. Wind moved through reeds rehearsing sleep. Far away, a wolf gave its single note of belonging, and the echo came back unashamed. God listened to the echo and smiled, because even distance had learned how to be kind. He lowered himself to the ground and lay there, eyes open to the stars that had outlived instruction. For a long time he did nothing, and in that deliberate nothing, the universe worked perfectly. He could feel every breath of it, the spin of moons, the conversations of atoms, the small warmth of hearts beating in countless bodies. And he knew that all of them had learned his rhythm by living, not by watching. He thought, I am everywhere they choose gentleness, and the thought itself dissolved into wind. A moth came and circled his face, unsure of what to worship, finally landing on his sleeve as if to say, you too can rest. He thanked it, and did. Time, respectful, walked by on quiet feet. When he opened his eyes again, dawn was busy with its usual choreography, the blue thinning to gold, the hills discovering their shapes again, birds clearing their throats for colour. He stood slowly, brushed the cool dust from his hands, and watched his shadow appear behind him, patient and light. For a moment he studied it, the first reflection he ever received, now tamed by morning. He said, you and I began this, and the shadow bowed in acknowledgement before folding itself into day. He began to walk downhill, not as return, but as participation. With every step, he passed small mirrors performing their duties, dew on leaf, eyes in wonder, the sheen on a sleeping child's cheek. None of them called to him, all of them worked happily. He understood now that to be reflected was not to be remembered, but to be applied. The world had learned the method of his presence and kept using it correctly, quietly, endlessly, creatively. It was no longer his reflection. It was itself. At the valley floor, a stream crossed his path, the same one that had once waited for him to speak. Now it moved confidently around stones, murmuring directions only it understood. He knelt beside it, dipped his hands in the cool flow, and saw no face at all, only water doing what water does. That made him smile the most. You've graduated, he whispered. He drank and let the taste of earth and sky wash through him. When he stood, drops fell from his fingers back into the stream, and each drop caught a single spark of sunlight before it sank. It was a quiet ceremony, an unplanned completion. He walked farther until the valley widened into plain, the plain into horizon, and the horizon into something that had no edges. Everywhere the light was equal, unpossessed. He felt himself spreading thinner with each step, not disappearing, but distributing. The more he gave away, the more the world seemed to glow correctly. He paused once, looked back, not to claim, only to admire, and saw that even his footprints had chosen to bloom with grass. He said aloud, though no one was near, everything I touched now touches itself. The sentence pleased him. It was the first truth that needed no witness. He lifted his face to the sky, now fully morning, and for the briefest instant every mirror, water, eye, metal, dream, caught a piece of that gesture and returned it. A planet blinked brighter. A tear shimmered on someone's cheek, continents away. A spark jumped between stones. The universe answered by simply existing well. He laughed once, softly, the sound spreading until even silence smiled. Then it is done, he said. I do not end. I continue where love begins. He turned toward the horizon, the place without borders, and kept walking into the growing light until the light itself forgot he had been separate from it. And so, the world, now fluent in reflection, carried on. Rivers ran, children dreamed, Stars kept their appointments, and somewhere, always somewhere, gentleness looked up from its own hands, recognized the motion, and whispered back the only name creation ever needed to remember: thank you.